Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us for our last Wednesday webinar. Appreciate all of you who have stuck out and attended all of our Wednesday webinars. This might be close to our, I don't know, David, this is maybe our 7th or 8th or plus webinar.
I would say Richard would say 7 or 8. Yeah, it's definitely up there.
And they're all on, if you missed any of them, they're all on our YouTube channel. So this one's being recorded as well, and we'll add our final one to our YouTube channel for everyone to look. So we appreciate this. It won't be the last you'll see of us, but I think the Wednesday webinars, we will transition out of those after today. And after Amazing Give in August, we're going to be releasing our schedule for the fall. All of our trainings will be virtual. And then, of course, all of our trainings will be virtual, and then we will also have the focus being on resilience. So really, the focus of all of our trainings are going to be on resilience. You know, how do we get better because of this? What do we look like in the future, and growth? And so I'm excited to release that schedule soon. We've got to get through Amazing Give first. So we'll welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Leslie Banis, Director of Programs at the Community Foundation. We also have with us on the call David Roundtree from the Community Foundation, Director of our Diversity and Inclusion Outreach. And I wanted to start today, today our theme is Lessons Learned from COVID. Just wanted to give all you time to share. I had 2 speakers I wanted to bring in today to share about how they pivoted. And we talked about 4 different areas today that I wanted to focus on, being governance, your programs and services, fundraising, and collaboration, and just talk about lessons that that both of those organizations have learned, and then go into more group discussion where some of you can share. But before we dive into that, the Community Foundation did do our last, we did our 3rd assessment of the nonprofit sector, and I wanted to share with all of you what those results were, because many of you filled that survey out. We appreciate you guys doing it in such a hurry. I know we try to get it out to our elected officials early, and so I want to share some of those highlights with you. Just a few of you have asked, and so this will be, we started doing assessments back in April, so this is our 3rd assessment, kind of following what the nonprofit sector has looked like through the pandemic and through the crisis, and how you all have shifted. So the largest sector that subsector that responded was human services. So 31% of all of those that responded were human service organizations. 14% were educational, and then arts and culture were also 14%. So we appreciate all of you completing the survey. 36 of the respondents had yearly operating budgets of more than 1 million, and then 44 had operating budgets below 250. So it was interesting, the response we got. We heard from everyone, but maybe not so much the middle. So we heard from the large organizations and some of the smaller ones for this third assessment. Some good news out of it was that 63% of the organizations were able to keep their staff on payroll. Only 13% of the organizations have had to furlough staff, which was a tremendous change from when we did the 2nd assessment back in early May, where many of the groups and nonprofits, there were 51% that indicated that they wanted to keep staff on, they just weren't sure how. And so I think that everyone cited the Paycheck Protection Program for this, and those that were able to secure those fundings, secure that those dollars were, was a large part in being able to keep the staff on. So 88% reported a decrease in your revenue related to COVID. I'm sure that's probably close to 100%, but 88% said you've seen a significant decrease in funding. The average loss per organization was about $63,300. So that was the average loss from that we heard from the sector. 81% of you said you had to cancel some type of fundraising event, which was an increase since the last time we asked. When we asked in May, there was 13% said that they had to cancel, and now we're 13% more. So many of you, I think, that had fall events have now had to cancel those or reschedule them or make them virtual. So that's been significant. And you've seen a reduction in individual giving by about 60%. We also saw that 68% of organizations said that you could operate your current capacity for no more than 6 months without dipping into reserve. into your reserve accounts, and 72% have less than 6 months of reserve. So that's going to be a lot of our training this fall. Will be on, how do you build up those reserves? What does that look like? And then a vast majority cited a significant increase in client needs. With the cancellations of fundraising events and support, how do you work with an increased demand and decreased funding? And so the Community Foundation reached out to the Gainesville Sun with these results, and they did a story this weekend. I hope most of you were able to see that story. David's going to throw that story in the chat in case you weren't able to see it. It's also on the Community Foundation's Facebook page, just to see sort of how those assessments wrapped up. Is there any questions? I know I didn't have pretty charts like I have in the past or anything fancy. Just wanted to talk through those. Did anybody find that helpful? Just to kind of see what's going on in the sector. And like I said, the article from the Gainesville Sun will go into more detail. So as we dive in to our topic today on lessons learned from COVID, before we let our speakers go into our speakers, I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe what the Community Foundation, like lessons learned, not necessarily from the Community Foundation, but from what we've heard from most of you. And I think that sticking to those 4 topics, governance, service, fundraising, collaboration, we've really heard those 4 themes. We've heard, lessons learned from all of you. We've heard communicate. Communication has been key in the lab. Communicating with your donors, communicating with your staff, communicating with your collaborative partners has been a huge thing. We've heard a lot of you talk about sticking to your plan. Those of you that had emergency plans, or even those of you that had some type of hurricane emergency plan, were able to flip that into COVID. And so really trying to come up with a plan and sticking to your plan. We heard a lot of you talk about leadership, and leadership meant something different to every organization. So whether that was you being the leader in your subsector or you being a leader to your clients, showing somewhere that type of leadership, standing up, the nonprofits really played that role during this time when maybe others didn't have capacity or the know-how or really even the strength or mental ability to do that. We saw nonprofits really stay up. And then we saw great focusing on your mission. We saw so many of you, so you had to go kind of outside your mission, but you've really stayed focused in the center and stayed focused on what your organization's done. And so those have been the quick sort of overlying lessons, and I'm sure our speakers will touch on some of that today. So I wanted to turn it over first to Stephanie Bales, with Executive Director of Cade Museum. I wanted Stephanie to talk more about how they've shifted and some lessons that they've learned that maybe she can share with all of you. So Stephanie?
Hi, Leslie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. Nice to see you all. Leslie, can I share my screen for a moment? Oh, you got it. Oh, perfect. Let me find my... All right. I'll start at the beginning. Can everybody see? And I'm not going to, I sometimes get messed up. Oh, well, no, I'll just go ahead and try and do it this way now. There we go. So, Leslie, I think really covered it perfectly. I mean, it sounds like the survey results we're all kind of thinking the same things and working along the same lines. So some of this isn't going to be new for you. But what it will do is it'll just show our perspective in this whole kind of thing that we call COVID. So I'm with the Cade Museum. The mission of the Cade Museum is to transform communities through inspiring and equipping future inventors, entrepreneurs, and visionaries. And since we're still relatively new, I never miss the chance of just telling people who we are. So, but lessons learned. So one of the first things that we understood when COVID came out was that it was important to focus the team on the same endpoint and communicate it regularly. So that was one of the survey responses. Communication is key, keeping people focused. At the very beginning, I'm showing you a slide, one of the first slides I showed to my team when we had our first all-staff call. What I did is I compared what we were on as a marathon, and that we were all getting ready to run a marathon, and that we could only focus on crossing the finish line, but we still didn't know what that finish line was. And so, so I had 4 key points that I needed everybody to focus on until we got a better sense of what we were facing as an organization. And you'll see what those 4 key points was for us, but we made everybody understand at the outset that they were important, that we were working to maintain the workforce as long as possible. so that they felt comfortable, confident, and secure in their jobs. And we were working through evaluating funding sources that would let us do that. We quickly established a rhythm for the organization and like gave everybody a sense of the cadence so that we were all working together. So first lesson learned, focus the team on the same endpoint and communicate regularly. Once we understood a little bit more, the second lesson learned was let's set a unified vision for the future. We all understood what our 2020 plan was. I mean, we all knew what our goals and objectives were for 2020, but that plan did not address what our future might look like in this COVID scenario. So at the outset, we looked at those like practical task-oriented items that we knew we could accomplish in the short term, and we set that as our vision for the finish line. And so this here is a list of all of the little things that we had everyone focused on. We split our organization into teams to address and get some of these things completed. But at the end of the day, it was all about unifying everybody to the same endpoint as best as we could, given the information that we had at the time. And then the other thing that was really important in that vision setting was also making sure that we gave regular doses of inspiration, to the point that it might have even been hokey. But as you all know, mindset is important. So, you know, don't think about the start of the race, think about the ending. Let's get everybody moving in the same direction, in the same place, knowing we're gonna all finish at the same time together. The next lesson learned, let's see if we'll get to that. Yeah, oops, back. How do I go back? There we go. Was, you know, I heard the survey results about sticking to your plan, and that is important. But for the museum, our plan was primarily about drawing people into the museum and having that in-museum experience. And that's something that we could not do any longer. So I felt that like our overarching lesson learned was important to be confident in reinventing yourself, reinventing your programs, which allows you to still fulfill your mission, but may change who you've been and how you operate. So for the Cade Museum, that meant that we had to pivot from in-museum experiences to working in a digital environment. We had to establish new distribution channels for our content, our educational content. And I know it's not unique to us, but then we had to reimagine what our in-museum experiences look like based upon local, state, and federal guidelines, and implement those requirements in a place that made our guests feel safe. So again, you know, just we had to be confident in reinventing who we were as an organization and how we operated. And I think if you probably all look at your operations, you had to do the very same thing. So 3 important lessons learned was focus the team on the same endpoint, communicate it regularly, set a vision for the future that is relevant to the environment you're operating within, and being confident enough to reinvent yourself and adapt to the times. And so you've already seen that kind of next slide, but as I was thinking about lessons learned, I was like, well, there are lessons that we're still learning. And, you know, even though this call is going to be over after this particular Wednesday, I think Leslie is right in setting up new calls that have an agenda about resilience, because who knows what is next. I think it's important that we're all getting ourselves in the appropriate mindset. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I'm sure I'm not the only one who recognizes that this is a long haul, and it's going to be 12 to 24 months before we may return to normal. And so how do we as leaders of our organizations keep our teams engaged and in line and moving in the same direction over that course of time when we don't know what's next? We need to plan accordingly. Plans are important, but you know what? We can't just have one plan anymore. We really need to think through the scenarios that may present themselves to us and develop some frameworks that address each one of those scenarios. For us at the museum, we have three scenarios that we're planning for, so that when we start moving through the year, hopefully we'll be able to have bits and pieces that might address the environment that we're in at that point in time. Does that make sense? And then our most important asset we have is staff that's loyal to the mission of the institution. And that's really important because this is a scary time. People have competing priorities, but we need to recognize that the people that we have that are on board in our organizations that are passionate about what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, those people are so critical to our ability to be successful in the future. And so for us at the museum, we're working through any way possible to keep them on board for the long term, even if we're not still bringing people into the museum and they're not still serving their original hired function. We're thinking about how we can reorient them so that we can plan for the future when we're through what we're facing right now, because we will be through it. We know that. The other important asset is the relationships we have within the community. So that's, that again speaks to the fundraising, that speaks to the collaboration, because those relationships now, I think now is a real good opportunity to further develop them, maybe start talking about bigger plans for collaboration once we're all through that, and setting those plans in place so that we can be stronger as a community once we're through all this. And then finally, the lessons we're still learning is to communicate confidence, not fear, to our employees and our constituents. This is not the first time that, humanity has faced a pandemic like this. It isn't. I was just in the Highlands about 3 weeks ago with my family, and I learned while I was there that the Highlands actually started as a place for tuberculosis patients. It was a sanatorium, like they had a sanatorium there where people went to recover, and that was in the 20s, I guess, in the 30s. And it made me realize, we've been through these things before, and it doesn't change how scary it is and how real the threats are. But at the same time, as leaders within our organizations, we need to be able to communicate confidence to our employees, to our staffs, and to our guests that we can provide a safe environment for them, whether it be in person or virtually. So those are my lessons still learning. So I've given you lessons learned, lessons still learning. Maybe some of these resonate with you, some of them you've probably already known, but thank you for allowing to share my perspective. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say after we're done giving the presentations.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Hopefully everyone picked up some tips. And we do have a recorded webinar that I'm happy to share afterwards, where Stephanie goes into more detail about how Cade pivoted and shifted through COVID. And that's also a great webinar to watch. So we'll probably share that as well, Stephanie, with your presentation. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. And so we also have with us Scott Winzeler with Habitat for Humanity. So Scott, if you want to unmute, and love to hear from you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm on the phone. That's wanted to make sure that was. Well, Stephanie, thank you. That was really quite impressive. The way you guys are organizing and made me jealous of your spunk. I approached this a little bit differently. I just looked at how the pandemic has impacted us in various ways through operationally, through our governance, through our services, through our fundraising. Operationally, we did what, we had to learn on our feet, and we quickly took and dismissed. We had people set up to work remotely. And we had to close our store. One of our primary resources is our restore, but we had to close that for about 6 weeks. Eventually, we opened that up following safety guidelines and so forth. but the big thing for us was that we had to suspend the use of volunteers, and we still have to suspend that. It was the dark cloud, but the silver lining on that is that when then I talked to donors about the extra expense of doing Habitat for Humanity homes with contractors instead of volunteers, people were willing to step up, and they felt like they could make a contribution. I forgot to say I'm from Habitat for Humanity. We build affordable housing, and you know, going back to Stephanie's theme, that we keep going back to that mission. Our mission cannot stop as a result of the pandemic. It has to keep going. There is one household out of every 3 in Alachua County that is a cost-burdened household, spending more than 30% of their income on housing for their rent or their mortgage. And so, and especially in this time of sheltering in place, we feel that affordable housing, decent housing, is also healthy housing. And so we want to continue unabated. In fact, our strategic plan calls for us to gradually increase the number of houses that we're building. But getting back to the impacts and how it affected us in different ways, I looked at the area of governance, for example. And one of the big pluses to come out of the pandemic is everyone has become increasingly familiar with electronic tools. Everyone, you know, and I have a lot of people on my board who are retired, who never participated in a Zoom call before, and now they're all old hands at it. And so that has sort of broken down the need to have live meetings. And I find that actually the Zoom format allows for, at least, you know, for our board meetings where we have maybe 10 or 12 people on the event, allows for more participation and in some way more intimacy and more involvement on board members, rather than coming to a meeting and sitting at a table and letting the more dominant person talk. People are more engaged, and there's more activity and more participation. Like I said, in the area of services, we made a real quick determination that we would not abate our home building program. And so we continued using construction staff and contractors and adhering to COVID-19 precautionary guidelines. In terms of fundraising, again, I go back to the electronic tools and how this was such a benefit to me personally, because I was forced to learn how to do a lot of, to use a lot of tools. For example, in the first weeks of the pandemic, I attended a webinar in which the main point of the webinar was stay in touch with your donors, ask how they're doing, and when they contribute, send them a simple little video thank you, an individualized video thank you, which I've started to do, and it's actually a lot of fun to stand in front of my iPad and record a little greeting, maybe splice together a drive-by at some of our build sites to let the donors see how their money is being utilized. But that's kind of fun. We also had to pivot in terms of, we had to cancel our fundraising event, which had been scheduled for late March. We postponed it to May, and then in May, we did a virtual event. And that also was a huge learning experience. I asked all of our sponsors to give me a 30-second video. In the same way I'm going out and creating simple little videos to thank our donors, I asked our sponsors to create a video talking about who they are, why they support Habitat, and, you know, a little plug for them as well as for Habitat. And I got, you know, about 10 or 12 sponsors, and I spliced them all together. It was part of our Facebook Live. We'd keep cutting away to the sponsor videos, and it was very touching. And then the event itself, originally as a live event was going to be a maximum of maybe 180 people because Hotel Indigo couldn't accommodate any more than that. As it turned out, our Facebook Live event has been viewed by almost 1,700 people with almost, I think it's 200 engaged people. And so we had tremendous exposure. We also reduced the cost of the event. We didn't have to pay Hotel Indigo. And so the bottom line of the event was we raised $35,000 net in the same way we might have raised it in a live event, but we didn't have to face those expenses. In terms of the, let's see, the thing I miss, and I've had some minuses of the pandemic, the things that I really miss are the ability to meet new people. There doesn't seem to be, if I go into a Zoom meeting and I don't know somebody, I'm kind of intimidated about, chatting with them and saying, hey, I'm Scott and I'm with Habitat for Humanity. So I really miss that. But by the same token, using technology to thank donors and to get people to participate is a lot of fun. I just yesterday released a virtual home dedication for 2 of our newest homeowners. In fact, I can send everybody a YouTube link to that. It was kind of fun to put my editing hat on. I was a speech and theater major in college, and it's coming full circle now because I get to be the director of these grand Habitat for Humanity video productions. So it's kind of fun. That's basically the points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Scott and Stephanie for sharing.